Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. Today we're talking about episode 87, Danny's Dead and Who's Got the Will. As usual, we'll start with a brief summary of the episode. Maxwell's grandmother Eloise is descending upon the family to make sure that they are all up to snuff, and Maxwell tries to get Fran to leave for the duration of Eloise's visit so as not to be cut off from Eloise's $80 million estate. Insulted, Fran convinces him to let her stay. However, shortly after Eloise's arrival, Fran becomes hysterical upon learning that her ex-fiancé Danny has died. At the wake, Val and Fran meet Harvey, who complains about how his long-term partner died, and then the partner's family refused to acknowledge their relationship. Fran, however, gets jealous because Harvey's partner was the opposite of Mr. Sheffield. He was romantic and doting and expressed his love for Harvey all the time. Dissatisfied with Maxwell, Fran quits her job and begins working at a cosmetics counter in a department store. Niles and the kids demand Maxwell get Fran back, so he visits her at her new job. To win her back, Maxwell tells her that he's written in his will how he feels about her, meaning that he can't take it back. She asks him to close his eyes and pretend that he's dead, and then tricks him into reciting the message in his will over the loudspeaker. I, Maxwell Sheffield, care deeply for Fran Fine and told her, I love you. He did not know at the time that Cece was in the store, and we hear her pained scream. Bernadette, do you want to add anything?
No, I do not.
All right. Would you like to take us to the living room?
Yes, so we open up with Fran and Niles. Fran's in a robe, once again. And Niles, though, is dressed up. And Fran's like, boy, I'd be all over you if I were 10 years older. And Niles was like, And Fran is like, down, boy, that ain't going to happen for another 20 years. And Niles is like, well, get it while you can. I may have met someone else and moved on by then. And then he kind of pauses and he's like, welcome to the windmills of my mind.
Yep.
So Fran is asking, like, why did he bring out his Mr. French collection? And talking about what he's wearing. And Niall says, well, Mr. Sheffield swore me to secrecy. He checks his watch. It's been long enough. He sits down with Fran and explains that Grandma Eloise is coming for a visit and Mr. Sheffield wants Fran out of the house. And of course, Maxwell shows up right then. He hasn't heard this conversation. He just shows up and he asks Fran, says to Fran, oh, you look tired. You could use a break, some time off. Why don't you take this weekend, off? And Fran's like, oh, what are you thinking, Maui? And he's like, I was thinking more about your parents' place or thinking of your parents. And then Fran goes, they burn. Aspen? And Maxwell's like, done. And Fran's like, are you really that desperate to get me out of the house? Are you embarrassed of me in front of your, Grandma Eloise? And Maxwell gives the most dramatic gasp. And he's like, who told you? And then he cocks his eyebrow and he goes, Niles!
Yep.
And we see Niles closing the door to the bathroom in the hallway. And then Maxwell's explaining to Fran, that every few years, Grandma Eloise, visits the various family members to see if they're up to her standards or they're out of her will.
Yep.
And Fran's like, so you're willing to risk, my hurting my feelings? How much money does someone need? And then Maxwell's like, well, she's worth $80 million. And Fran's like, bye-bye. And makes the exit. And that is the opening scene. Do you have anything to add?
I don't.
Okay. Will you take us to the next scene?
Yeah. So now Fran is no longer in the bathrobe. She's now dressed and she's, cooing to Maxwell about how I just want to tell you how sweet I think it is that you begged me to stay and meet your grandmother. And we learned that that's obviously not what happened. He says, I believe my exact words were, would you please stop crying and screaming? I give up, stay. And she's like, well, I prefer to see the glass as half full. So the doorbell rings and in comes Eloise. And Maxwell says to her that I wish we had known sooner that you were coming so we could have. And, he sort of trails off and she's like, moved. And so Niles helps her off with her coat and she turns to Niles and says, it's so good to see you. Remember how we used to have those little talks when you were a little boy, your dreams of becoming a famous barrister, a member of parliament? Life's cruel, isn't it? And so Fran walks over and she introduces herself. Hello, I am Francesca Binet, and she curtsies. And may I say it is an honor, nay, a privilege to be working for such a fancy schmancy family. And obviously she's trying to ingratiate herself with Grandma Eloise. And Eloise just looks at her and is like, well, that's an intriguing outfit. And Fran's like, thanks, I got it half off. To which Eloise responds, I was wondering where the rest of it was. And Fran looks pained until Maxwell, in his stage whisper reminds her 80 million. And then, she smiles and laughs. And Maxwell, was going to start walking Eloise, into the house further. And Cece comes and she says, oh, it's a pleasure to see you again. And well, needless to say, the only one that Eloise seems to be thrilled with is Cece. And he's like, Cece, my dear, you always look so beautiful. I don't understand it. Are you single by choice? To which Niles chimes in, yes, but not hers. And so we're starting to see Grandma Eloise's personality.
Did you see what Cece did in response to Niles' little quip?
Oh, I didn't. I must have missed that. What did she do?
I thought, or this might have been later. Didn't she kind of spit or do something to him as she walked away? Like something in his eye?
Yeah, that sounds believable.
Okay.
Needless to say, she was not thrilled. But so Grandmother Eloise continues her, shall we say, reign of terror. So she turns her attention to Maxwell and she's saying that how she was so sorry that she missed his play's opening night in London and that she tried to get a ticket for the next day, but they wouldn't put the sets back up and get the actors all together just for one person, which
burn.
Maxwell is not thrilled. And so now it's Fran's turn to remind him 80 million, 80 million. And so, we sort of get thrown off from this interaction because the phone rings and, Niles answers and, it's Fran's mom, it's Sylvia. And so he says that she sounds hysterical and Fran's like, oh, she probably just got out of the shower and saw the mirror has two tuchuses. And so she walks off with the phone and then the kids come in and, Maxwell tries to, introduce the kids more to his grandmother. And she says, come kiss your great grandma, 50 quid to the first one over. And none of the kids really move. So Niles goes over and kisses her and says, I love you, Nana. And then, of course, I think Brighton or Maggie pushes Gracie forward. But that's sort of, again, we're sort of jumping back and forth because we're setting up all of the plots here. Fran comes back in and she is hysterical. Oh my God, Danny. And it's very hard to understand her. And so, Niles has to translate for her because she's so hysterical. But the bottom line is Danny Imperiali, the man she was in love with, and, Niles tries to explain Danny was her ex-fiance. And she's like, oh no, not anymore. He's dead. Why? And she's so upset, to which again, Maxwell plays the role of reminding her of Eloise's, presence, 80 million. And Fran immediately turns on a dime. Que sera, sera. Do you want? And then I couldn't hear what she was offering, but she went from being hysterical so much so that she was sobbing and crying and we couldn't understand her to que sera, sera.
Yep.
Do you have anything you want to add?
I do not.
All right. Would you like to take us to the wake then?
Yes. So we are at the wake and Fran and Val go together and Fran's like, "Oh, Val, I hope I didn't dress too festive for a wake, but I had to wear this. I mean, in private, Danny always used to call me his little tiger." So I think this is an appropriate situation
Agreed.
in which we describe that she is wearing a tiger print suit, but one of her classic suits where it's short skirt, tight. I don't know if you have any different descriptors for it.
So it's like I'd mentioned, like it's kind of like a light orange tan with the black stripes that you'd imagine a tiger wearing. Then she has a brown, so like a matching turtleneck, and of course high heels. So
Hmm. And then, of course, after Fran explains that Danny used to call her his little tiger, we pan over to see other women standing around kind of the table with the food, also wearing tiger print.
yep.
And Fran and Val make their way over there, and Fran's like, "What is this? The Serengeti?"
Hmm.
Um, so while Val and Fran are next to the table putting like a sandwich and some olives on their plate, they look over to where the casket is open, and Heather, who we've only really heard about till now, right, is
Hmm.
there, and kind of wiping her tears, looking down at Danny, and we'll have some fun and future fun regarding who Heather is. But suffice it to say, it's someone who's known to be good looking. Okay.
Hmm.
And Fran's like, "Oh, could you imagine 4 years ago when, he left me for her, that she'd end up 4 years later so alone and miserable?" And then they kind of share like a smirk or something like that.
Very big grin.
Yes. And then Heather, Fran talks to Heather then, goes over and talks with her. And because Heather's thanking them for coming, but she's saying she's too young to be a widow. And then immediately there's a man who comes into the view, and she goes, "Who's that?" And Fran's like,
Mhm.
"Focus, Heather." And Heather again is kind of dabbing at her eyes, and she says, every time she looks at the bathroom handle, she sees his underwear hanging there. And she walks away, and Fran turns to Val. "He actually hung his underwear up for her. I trained him, and she gets the benefits."
Right.
Um, and then this is when we learn how Danny died, because Val is just like, like, yeah, who would have thought he would die from an allergic reaction to back wax? And Fran explains it's hereditary. He lost a couple of aunts that way as well.
Right.
So they're kind of now like over the casket looking down at him. They each have their plates. Um, and again, just Fran's kind of talking about, how she never thought he would die this young, right? Always thought he was indestructible. And Val's like, "Yeah, yeah, remember that time he forgot your birthday and you tried to run him over? He survived. And then there's that time you caught him kissing Valerie,
Veronica
Ford,
Forte.
Veronica Forte." And Fran's like, "Val, the point is that," and at that point, though, her plate tips over. So the sandwich and olives are now on Danny. And at first, Fran tries to get Val to go in and grab the stuff. And Val's like, "I'm not touching him." And so Fran puts her hand into the casket, is feeling around, and she's like, "Oh, I got a couple." And then her face just kind of like big expression. Obviously, something's gone wrong. And she
Hmm.
explains to Val, "My watch got caught on his zipper." And but someone's approaching, and so she's trying to get Val to like save her from being humiliated. And so Val covers Fran, but tells the person point up, her watch got caught in his zipper. And
Yep.
the other person kind of gives a weird look, walks away. And Fran, who is still stuck, is like, "Val, you're like Rain Man without the math skills."
Mhm.
Well, at that point, Val's like, oh, look, they're bringing out the jumbo shrimp. And miraculously, Fran's able to get free. And Val's like, I knew that would work.
Did you catch what Val called Fran?
A hussa?
Chaza.
Okay.
I throw that out because we'll talk about it in Yiddish-a-kop.
Okay. Yeah, like the captions spell it as Hussa.
That is totally wrong.
Okay, well, blame the captions. So, anyway, so at this point, Val kind of goes off. So Fran is going to refill her plate since she didn't get to eat her sandwich. And a man comes up to her and he's like, hi there, friend or family? And Fran's like, former lover.
Mm-hmm.
And then she the man, just to set the scene, has like stuff on his plate and he has a celery stick and he like is chomping down into it. And Fran notices that the man is wearing tiger print.
Yeah.
And so she's like, did he call you his little tiger too? And immediately the man bursts into tears. And Fran's like takes that as confirmation. Oh, if it had a pulse, he would. And the guy interrupts, I never even met him. I just bit the inside of my cheek.
Mm-hmm.
And he introduces himself as Harvey. And then he does explain, though, that he understands. Because earlier he said he understands what it's like. But he explains he understands because he lost his significant other, Bernard, 6 months ago.
Right.
And since then, he likes to crash funerals because he finds it therapeutic to dwell. To which Fran says, oh, you're Jewish. And he doesn't deny it. He goes on to say that he and Bernard were together for 16 years, but now his family pretends that he never even Harvey never even existed. And he's like, do they really believe that I'm the dog walker or the dog walkers in so many pictures? I mean, there was a couple of pictures, collar with them in a collar, but that's none of their business. And Fran's like, how can you be such a doormat, to allow the family to treat you like that? I know someone who's in a situation, where the guy won't commit, and it's the 4th year, and I'm sick of it. And and Harvey's like, I wasn't a doormat. Like, he said he loved me all the time. He was doting and romantic. We had a private ceremony in Honolulu. And Fran kind of snaps, don't be such a crybaby. She's obviously jealous. Do you have anything to add to that scene?
I guess my only question for you is, if you were in Fran's shoes, would you have identified yourself as a former lover, or would you have just said friend and left it at that?
Oh, yeah, friend.
Yeah, me too.
How about you? Yeah. Nope. But I mean, she's surprisingly chill with Heather in this episode. So, anyway.
I mean, now Heather's a widow, so
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, will you take us to Sylvia's apartment?
I'd love to. Although I'll point out that Morty lives there too. Not that we have seen him yet.
Yes. I always refer to Sylvia's apartment, though. The fine family home.
Exactly. So we're in the kitchen and Fran comes in and she says to her mother that I got to talk to you. And Sylvia is so thrilled that she's there because Fran is able to help her eat the tub of ice cream because she's defrosting her freezer. And so Fran basically fills Sylvia in that she met a man at Danny's funeral. And Sylvia's like, fabulous. He's Jewish? And Fran's like, yeah, and a doctor. And Sylvia's like, ooh. And Fran adds, and he's gay. To which Sylvia says, so are you seeing him again? And Fran's like, how desperate do you think I am? Friday, we're going to go see Showboat. Anyway, the thing is, his lover died and his family will not acknowledge the fact that they had a relationship. And Sylvia's like, ooh, a widower. And Fran's like, the point is, if something happened to Mr. Sheffield, I could have the same problem. And of course, Sylvia gets up because the toaster pops and she takes out a waffle and she comments, oh, it's still cold. You want? And Fran's like, Ma, I'm pouring my heart out. All right, since you made. The thing is, if God forbid something, and she, spits over her fingers like we've seen her do before, happened to Daddy, at least the world would know you were his wife and he loved you. And Fran is told by her mother, I only wish for you the joy that me and your father have. And then she's back in the freezer and she pulls out the ice cube tray and she's like, look at this. And she shouts, you can't fill a tray, you putz. And Fran's like, see, this is what I want.
Mm-hmm.
A great relationship involving lots of yelling and name calling.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything you want to add, or would you like to take us to the hallway in the Sheffield home?
I will take us to the hallway.
Excellent.
So we see in the hallway Niles dusting, and Grandma Eloise is in one of the rolling chairs, and she goes, Missed a spot, missed a spot. And you can see that Niles is getting more and more irritated as his dusting becomes more aggressive. And finally, he ends up pushing her into Maxwell's office, saying, here, I don't want to hog her, and like closing the door behind her. So it's Maxwell and Grandma Eloise there for just a moment until Fran bursts in.
Right.
And Fran's like, we have to talk, mister. And Maxwell's like, surely you mean, may we? And sir, because he's kind of like looking down at his grandmother. And Fran's like, oh, so you're already pretending that there's nothing between us? And then she like shoves the chair that has Grandma Eloise in it, and she goes like across the room.
Yep.
And Fran continues, and you're not even dead yet? And Maxwell's like, Miss Fine, perhaps you're still grieving over the sad loss of your, and Fran's like, oh, what, my youth? And then she goes on, don't you know that if you were, God forbid, in a coma, technically I'm not considered family? I wouldn't be allowed to pull the plug. I should at least have that much satisfaction.
Right.
And I need to add, just like, her hair is a little in disarray, and she has kind of a crazed expression to her in this scene.
Understandably.
Yes. And Maxwell, meanwhile, goes to his grandmother and starts wheeling her out of the room, saying, Grandmother, I'm going to need a few minutes alone with my nanny, and like closes the door. And immediately, as soon as Grandma Eloise is back in the hallway, she tells Niles, missed a spot. And then we're back in the office where Fran is saying, you told me that you loved me. Well, I want a man that can shout it from the rooftops. And Maxwell's like, I told you I loved you, but then I took it back. And Fran's like, you shouted the wrong part.
Yep.
And then she's like, that's it. I quit. I am not going to wake up someday and have to fight your family for the picture of you in the dog collar. And this is as she's like going out. So like this is stuff his grandmother would have overheard.
Yep.
And she like spins her chair, and Maxwell's going after Miss Fine, and also kind of getting tangled up in the chair. And then they both kind of go back, through. So it's just Grandma Eloise and Niles again. And Grandma Eloise just says, you already did that spot. And Niles just kind of throws up the feather duster in the air and walks away.
Correct.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No.
Okay. Will you take us to the department store?
Sure. So we now go to the department store and we hear Fran is, making an announcement. Attention all shoppers. Will the lady who left the Armani sunglasses at the cosmetics counter please bring the case? And so we see that she's there with Val, and Val comments that Fran is so lucky that the job came up just when she quit. And Fran's like, oh, I know. The lady that used to work here was very elderly and she was shrinking. Every time she opened the cash register, the drawer would hit her in the head. And Val's like, oh, so they fired her. And Fran's like, no, no, no. They kept her on. She works 2 weeks a year as an elf. And then she realized that her boss is coming. And so she pretends that she's doing her job and she starts like, I want to say
Pretend she's putting
dusting.
on blush.
Yeah. Yeah. She's like putting on blush on Val and she makes the comment, oh yes, miss, this blush is absolutely perfect on you. It's going to drive your boyfriend wild. And of course, Val blows her cover by saying, I don't have a boyfriend, Fran. And well, Mr. Bender is there and he comments about, well, look who's finally behind her counter. And he points up, you see those security cameras? She's like, uh-huh. He's like, peekaboo. At 10:15, they caught you in ladies' shoes. At 10:30, purses. Then there was a mad dash through hosiery, then jewelry, ending with a non-fat double latte in the food court. And Fran's like, well, with all that shopping, I needed a little caffeine buzz. Needless to say, she's doing just as well at the cosmetics counter as she was doing in the Sheffield home. Actually, I'd say worse than she was doing in the Sheffield home.
I would say worse. So yeah, so we are now then back at the office, and Maxwell is talking to Niles saying, I can't believe she actually quit. Can you believe that she said she implied that working for me is a dead end? And Niles at this point is like on his hands and knees on the rug with a small, what are they called?
So, I mean,
It's a handheld vacuum.
Yeah.
But it was called like a Dust Buster
Devil?
or something. Duster, yeah, something like that. And so Niles is like, oh, pish posh or pish tosh. Look how I've risen in the company. And so Maxwell starts saying, I really should have seen this coming, ever since I told her I love her and took it back. And Niles is like, you what? And then she's like getting up right as Grandma Eloise is coming into the room. And Niles just yells, get out, old woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually does just kind of leave. And Niles continues, that's it. That's the thing. Oh, I could kick you in the seat of the pants. And Maxwell's like, I beg your pardon. I said I need to press the pleat in your pants, but that's besides the point. You need to march down to that department store and beg that woman to come back. And Maxwell's like, don't you dare give orders to me. I'm the one who makes the decisions. And all the kids come in at that point. Maggie says, Daddy, you march right down there and you get Fran back. And Maxwell kind of like gets like all like kind of nervous or like demure. I don't know.
Indecisive.
You really think I should? Like, I mean, he's obviously just kind of like, oh, like total change in demeanor. And all the kids are like, yes. And Maxwell's like, but I need a pretext. And Brighton says, take Grace and lose her. I do that all the time. And
Exactly.
Gracie's like, I'll go get my coat. And then the kids are at like Maggie and Brighton are asking like, did you do something to to Fran? And Max was like, no. And Niles is kind of like, but you wish you did now.
Mm-hmm.
And then but then so the kids Maxwell, I think, asks the kids to leave.
Yeah.
Once they do, he turns around and he kicks Niles in the butt.
Yep.
And he's like, that's for you, that's for you kicking me or something like that. And Niles is like, but I never kicked you. And Maxwell goes all tauntingly, but you wished you did now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scene. Do you have anything to add to it?
No, I'll take us back to the department store.
Great.
So Fran is still, I guess, learning how to use the, overhead announcement thing. And
the intercom.
Intercom, thank you. See, words I don't use all the time. is this thing on? Listen, will Bernice and Lady's shoes please hold the size 7 Manolo Blahnik lavender mules? I think I can sneak away in about 10 minutes, Bernice. And she gets her interrupted, or I guess she's done. Cece's like, Nanny, fine, what are you doing here? And
Yeah,
Fran's
we
like,
heard her. Like, we saw a clip of her eyebrows going up as she heard her voice over the intercom.
right. So Cece doesn't know what's happened, and she's like, and Fran's like, Miss Babcock, didn't you hear? I quit. And Cece's like, oh, that's terrible. Maxwell will be so lonely without you. And Fran's like, oh, it was a difficult decision to make, but ultimately I had to do what was best for me. And Cece's like, yeah. I have to get back to work. Maxwell and I have a very long night ahead of us. And she says that as she says that, she's spraying herself with perfume, like on her chest, on her wrists, etc. And then she walks away and talks to another sales associate. Excuse me, can you tell me where the ladies' lingerie is, please? And the two of them walk off arm in arm. And Mr. Bender comes and taps Fran's head, and she's like, ow. And he's like, is this thing on? Bernice told me to tell you that they are out of the size 7 lavender mules. And Fran's like, oi, do they come in mauve? And needless to say, that was the wrong thing to say. He hands her some samples and tells her to put them in gift bags. And she says, certainly. And he walks away, and she puts the little gift bags down. She starts putting the samples in. Merry Christmas, Maggie. Happy Hanukkah, Ma, and congratulations on your new job, Fran. And who should show up then but Maxwell? And she wants to know, Mr. Sheffield, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, I just thought I would drop by and see how the new job was going. Nothing more, nothing less, no ulterior motive. Happy. And she's like, I'm thrilled. I love it here. They treat me with a lot of respect. It's a whole different experience. Immediately thereafter, we hear Mr. Bender shouting, Miss Fine! And she, of course, ducks, and he walks by looking for her. He pops back up, and she says, well, anyway, Mr. Sheffield, I hope that you understand why I had to leave. I mean, it just became too painful for me. Nobody really knows what we have with each other, except for Ma, Val. And I'm sure the kids have an inkling. And this woman who we do not know in this episode pops by and asks, oh, are you two getting back together? And Fran shoves her away and explains to Maxwell, well, I had to eat lunch with someone. And he's like, Miss Fine, you've got to know how I feel about you. I'm just not ready to shout it from the rooftops yet, but I have put it in writing. I have declared my feelings for you in my will. And she's like, great. So I have to wait until you're dead before everybody can know how you feel about me? He's like, yeah, but then I can never take it back. And she's like, oh, that's so sweet. Well, at least when you're dead, I'll have something to look forward to. And he's like, happy? She's like, happy-er. But what about Grandma Eloise? I mean, aren't you afraid that when she finds out what you put in your will, she's going to cut you out of hers? And he's like, I don't give a damn about her millions. I just hope that she lives long enough to hear what I've put in my will. And she's like, well, you're pretty cocky. Could it be because she's 150? Come on, Mr. Sheffield. Why don't you tell me what you wrote in your will? And he's like, well, I don't have it here. And she's like, oh, don't be shy. Just close your eyes and pretend that you're dead and tell me what you said. It'll be just between us. Meanwhile, she grabs the intercom, which frankly looks like a big phone, and puts it near his head. And he says, I, Maxwell Sheffield, cared deeply for Fran Fine and told her, I love you. And then off screen, we hear Cece screaming.
And then there's actually a quick clip of her running out of the dressing room with like clothes stuck over her head and her tripping over a little satay, like right out.
Right.
Yeah. Just compounding the injury to Cece.
Exactly. Do you want to take us back to the living room?
Yes. So we're back in the living room, and Grandma Eloise and Grandma Yetta are on the couch. And Eloise turns to Yetta. Is there something going on between my grandson and your granddaughter? And Grandma Yetta's like, what? Are you senile? They have teenage kids and have only been married for 3 years. And Grandma Eloise is like, they're married? Nobody tells me anything. And then she turns to Yetta, you're the only one who likes me for me, not just to get in my will. And Yetta's like, well, why wouldn't I? You're a very lovely lady. It's Yetta Rosenberg. Rose. And Eloise kind of gives her a look. And then we see Heather and Fran walking out, and Heather's thanking Fran for inviting her over, and she's saying, Danny's the only man she's ever been with, what she's gonna do, all this kind of stuff. And as she's about to leave, she spies Mr. Sheffield, and she goes, who is that? Like, obviously with interest. And
What did she
Fran's
do
just
with her coat?
like puts it down, or like throws it on the ground.
No, she like opens it to like show her figure better.
Yeah. And Fran just goes, he's gay, bye, and and stuff. But like not before Maxwell had noticed Heather, and he's kind of looking after her with his jaw kind of open, and Fran goes over and closes it.
Saying?
It cut off at that point for me. So.
Oh, I think she closes Maxwell's mouth and says she's gay.
Okay. And that's the episode.
Correct. Is there anything you want to talk about before we hop into our shticks?
Yeah, just generally speaking, it's so funny how at the beginning there's such a big deal about Grandma Eloise coming, and then quickly beyond the first scene she's in, like they treat her with such disrespect.
Yeah.
Like pushing her around everywhere, the whole get out, you old woman, everything like that. It's just interesting.
So do you think that Maxwell and the kids are out of her will?
Who knows? Because I don't know. Like, it could go again one of two ways, where she feels so disrespected, they're out, or maybe it's with it being such a change of pace, she doesn't mind. I don't know. What do you think?
I think they're out of the will. And it's not just Maxwell, for the record, because keep in mind when like the kids show up in the first scene with her, she said, come give grandma a hug or whatever. And like the kids don't move.
So is Yetta in or out?
Yetta's out. Yetta's definitely out too.
Because... Yeah. I have a question though.
Sure.
In terms of wow, I just lost it. I don't have a question.
Well, that's fine. If it comes back, we can talk about it then.
Okay. Quickly, logistically, with with Maxwell, and the time it takes him to go from the office scene to the department store, he claims he's added to his will. That thing. I'm not familiar with New York estate law or anything like that, estate planning. Do you think he just like literally penciled in? Or do you think he didn't do it?
Well, so that's an interesting question, because if you recall earlier in the series, there was an episode titled The Will. And that it is towards the end of the second half of season 2, where it was a whole big thing that he updated his will, and he wanted to put it in his will that if he died, Fran would continue to be his nanny. And Fran, didn't want to sign the will because she thought it was bad luck, but ultimately she does sign it. And at the end, Niles is like, were our names mentioned anywhere else? And then she's like, oh, give that back to me. I want to see. I want to make sure I dotted my I. Like, that's the only time we hear about him updating his will. So like, it was a whole big production, which makes me wonder, it would have been way too early for him to do it then, right? Because like, that was...
Yeah, so was he just placating her?
To me, it sort of sounds like he placated her.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Yeah, I just don't think it would have, and it, like, logistically, I don't think it would have worked in that amount of time.
I mean, theoretically, he could have put it in there after the thing, after he took it back. But like when we just didn't know as an audience, I mean, that's
But I
possible.
don't think he would have without her prompting, without her specifically stating. Um, but anyway,
Yeah, no, I
do you
mean,
have any other broader thing to talk about?
no, but I'm just gonna chime in again. I think Maxwell was placating her.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, he doesn't come off so good. He doesn't come off so well. I think is the better way to
Mhm.
phrase that. Um, yeah,
Okay. So shall we jump into favorite fashion?
sure. Did you have a favorite piece of fashion in this episode?
Not particularly. But it's the first time in a couple of episodes that we've seen her back in a robe, I think.
I
Am I
thought,
wrong?
um, I thought we saw her in a robe just a couple weeks ago, but
Yeah, probably a couple weeks ago. But I mean, just it used to be much more frequent in earlier seasons
true,
than it has been thus far.
true. Although we've seen that bathrobe that she was wearing before.
Yeah, yeah. What about you?
I really thought there were some slim pickings in this episode. Um,
hmm
I didn't really care for Fran's wake attire
The
because
tiger,
the
the
tiger
tiger suit.
print. Yeah. I also didn't care for what Val was wearing because Val also to me seemed like she was dressed too brightly for a wake. Val was
hmm
wearing a red jacket. Um, I thought what Fran wore in the last scene, she was wearing like an orange shirt with like a black vest and a black skirt. To me, just screamed Halloween.
hmm
Um, I didn't care for that. And then, I mean, the other outfits we've seen on Fran anyway, we saw her in the red suit where she quit. That wasn't bad.
hmm
And then what she wore to meet Grandma Eloise, I think she was wearing like a green skirt and was it black skirt and a green blouse or vice versa? It was just
Something like that, yeah.
um
But wasn't it like a lime green or like a brighter green?
it was a brighter, but it was like a deep green.
Okay.
The only other piece of fashion I think worth commenting on is what Heather wore at her husband's wake.
Yeah.
She was wearing what we would normally see Fran in, a tank style dress that's very tight and very short.
hmm
And I don't even think it was black. I think it was like a deep brown. It was a low scoop neck. Not
hmm
exactly what you would imagine even a young widow wearing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Is there any other
Um,
fashion you want to talk about?
I do not.
All right, shall we jump to notable New Yorkers?
Yes.
There weren't that many.
Not as many, no. Um, now, okay. Windmills of my mind. I think there's actually, okay, what first came to my mind when I heard windmill was Don Quixote.
Same here.
But like I think I did like a quick like Google search,
Mhm.
and there's like a song called The Windmills of Your Mind. So
Correct.
I don't know if that's what the reference was or not.
I thought it was just like an expression, like these are the things that
Mhm.
like cross my mind.
Mhm. Yeah. Because like the reason why I thought Don Quixote at first is obviously there's windmills there, but the way that Niles said it sounded as if like he knows like it's kind of fanciful to like think of that way. Like it's not likely. Um, I don't
Right.
know.
So basically it's tilting at windmills, which is what
Mhm.
Don Quixote does.
Yes. So so yeah. So you also though saw that there was a song for it
I did.
with that title?
I did.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I don't know. I didn't recognize the actress who played Grandma Eloise.
I
But did
didn't
you do a
either.
little thing? Okay. Because, like,
Um,
according to Wikipedia, it's Myra Carter.
mhm.
And she is known for her work on stage. And she was actually born in Chicago, Illinois. So she's not British.
Just
She's
like
American.
just like Daniel Davis.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then we have, I don't know, again, whenever I heard Que Sera Sera, I thought of the song as well, but I know it's a phrase. I don't know if you put anything for that.
I just took it as a turn of phrase and left
Yeah.
it at that.
Okay. So Fran references, what is this? The Serengeti?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the 7 natural wonders of Africa. It's known for its large mammals, including lions, not necessarily tigers. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Yep. And then Heather is played by,
Pamela Anderson.
yep.
She's an American Canadian actress who, media personality and model, who's known for her role on Baywatch, which, by the way, we had a brief reference to previously on the Nanny, and also for modeling for Playboy. That's according to our friends also at Wikipedia.
Um, again, the guy who played Harvey, I wasn't familiar with.
He was played by Todd Graff, I believe.
Yes.
So he's actor, writer, and producer. He's known for The Vanishing, The Abyss, and Camp. I don't know any of those things, but this is his only appearance on The Nanny.
But he and Fran are going to go see Showboat.
A musical based on the 1926 novel by the same name. It follows the lives of the dock workers, performers, and stagehands working on a Mississippi River showboat called the Cotton Blossom over 40 years. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
So Fran at the department store says a couple of different items. I didn't know if you went into that or not.
I got the Manolo Blahniks.
Okay.
So Manolo Blahnik is a family-run company that was founded in 1970, and it's known for its women's shoes. And that's according to monoblahnik.com.
Yep.
Can I chime in with one we skipped?
Yeah.
Parliament. So Parliament is the legislative body of the government of the UK, really Britain. Yeah. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Did you have any others?
I believe I have one more.
Okay.
The sales girl, the one who, pops into the frame very briefly and asks Fran if she and Maxwell are getting back together. She's played by Casey Williams, who has previously been on an episode of The Nanny. She played the nurse at the hospital in Where's the Pearls? And fun fact, she will also play a nurse in the episode A Rash to Judgment in season 5, and a union rep in The Producers in season 6.
So she's there quite a bit.
Exactly. So then I'm out.
Okay. So Yiddish cop.
So we all know where I'm going to start. Shrimp is not kosher. Tuchuses, we've talked about a tuchus before. It's your butt. So tuchus is plural. Chaza means pig, someone who's, being a piggy. Putz, we've talked about before. It's a crude term for penis. It's used in a derogatory fashion. And then the last thing I want to comment on is Fran says to Harvey, after he says, I find it therapeutic to dwell. Fran's like, so you're Jewish. It's sort of an interesting reaction because in Judaism, there's, ritualized mourning, which is basically supposed to give you the time to process your loss and then slowly re-engage with the world. So, after a loved one dies, and typically you're required to ritually mourn for, parents, siblings, children, spouses, and anyone else you can choose to, but like those are the ones you're, required to. And so like after someone dies before the funeral, you're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to focus on like getting the funeral planned and basically living in your misery. Then you go to the funeral, and then after the burial, you have Shiva, which is a period traditionally 7 days. Shiva is the word for seven in Hebrew. And during that time, you don't work typically unless, bad, like huge financial consequences would follow, but you're not supposed to work, and people are supposed to come to the home and, bring food and sit with the mourners and keep them company. And you're supposed to sit on the low chairs or the uncomfortable wooden boxes or cardboard boxes to represent the fact that you've been lowered in the state of your life by the loss. After that, you have the period of Shiloshim, which is a 30-day period. It starts after burial. And so this is when the mourners begin to return to normal life. So one is able to attend to their affairs and, they can go to work, but they're, still supposed to, you're still expected to refrain from attending parties and shaving, cutting your hair, wearing new clothing, etc. And then after that, the only people who are still considered like actual mourners are those who've lost their parents. And typically a full year after a person dies, you'd have the unveiling, which is basically where you unveil the headstone or whatever other marker you have on the grave. And that's supposed to like, be the marker at the end. You're really only going to be doing those, ritualistic mourning for a parent. But anyway, so like,
that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we don't need to talk about the death of a parent more, but like it's different because, your parents are the ones who gave you life. They gave you unconditional love. They educated you. They helped you become the, hopefully fully functioning human being that you are at the time that you lose them. So anyway, so it's just interesting that his comment that I find it therapeutic to dwell, and Fran immediately is like, oh, so you're Jewish. It doesn't compute. So.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. So are we ready for some 90s nostalgia?
We are. I'll let you go first.
Okay. So, this is and it isn't.
Okay.
But the whole kind of story that Harvey tells, about his lover who has passed away, like obviously in 2015, gay marriage in the US became legalized. And obviously, unfortunately, recently there's been some attempts to go back. But as of this point, it's legal in all 50 states. So from like a legal perspective, I don't know if that private ceremony in Honolulu was only just kind of like metaphorical or like symbolic or not. Now, obviously, there's, still parents who might or family who might not acknowledge, someone's partner, but overall, one would hope things are different than what it was in the 90s.
Right. So a quick Google search, according to our friends at Reuters, Hawaii became the 15th state to legalize gay marriage, but that only happened in 2013.
Okay, there you go. So
Which
this
actually
episode was like 1997, right?
Somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
So that surprises me. I would have expected it to be sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Um, you can say your classic one
Old cars.
because I definitely saw it and made note that we
Me
can
too.
definitely say we saw them.
Yes. Um, the intercom. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't even think of the word intercom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Like the announcement system, like whatever you want to call it. A couple of years back though, when I was working at a library though, I did have to use one of those to like clear people out at night.
oh, interesting.
Uh-huh.
Did it look like the one we saw in the episode?
It was part of the phone system, but
Oh,
it wasn't
interesting.
as dated as the one that Fran uses.
Okay. So maybe that's not as nostalgic as I
No,
thought
I
it
mean
was.
it definitely looks dated, and I feel like generally the department store kind of feels dated in this day and age. I mean, they obviously still exist, but like not to the extent as back then, right?
Right. They're fewer and further between.
Mhm. Yeah. Um so yeah.
Do
Was
you,
there anything else that was
I'll
nostalgic?
yeah, I'll point out as we usually do the cordless phone that Fran gets the
Yep.
bad news on.
Yes. Mhm.
Maybe this is just my lack of knowledge about freezers, and I'm a bad freezer parent or freezer owner or whatever noun I'm supposed to use. Um, are you still supposed to defrost them periodically?
I don't know.
Okay, cool. So neither of us knows. Um,
Lovely listeners, are you supposed to defrost your freezer? 'Cause if
and
so, I have not.
and follow up question, if anyone chooses to answer that. If the answer is yes, that you are supposed to defrost your freezer, what happens if you don't? Because I've
Uh-huh.
never defrosted a freezer.
Yeah. And also, how frequently?
Exactly. Lovely listeners, let us know.
How to adult.
Exactly. We clearly don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else in that category or that shtick?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Now, in our new shtick for this season, after the thing, we have a new addition to that.
That we do. We're up to number 7.
Yep. And bonus, we're not putting it down, but bonus, Niles learns what the thing is.
Correct.
Finally. What, 12 episodes into the season?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's episode 12. So 12 episodes in, he finally learns. And he really doesn't let anybody get in his way this time. Get out, old woman.
Exactly. And frankly, on the one hand, I don't blame him because it's clearly been
Mhm,
driving him crazy this entire
mhm.
season that he doesn't know what the thing is.
Yeah.
But poor Eloise did not know that was coming.
Nope. She did not have a great visit.
No. She's probably taking some of her $80 million and rebooking her flight out so she can leave soon.
Yeah. Okay. So some future fun.
Well, first off, we never see grandmother Eloise again. So
Do you blame her?
no, which is also why, again, I think the Sheffield, this branch of the Sheffield family has been written out of her will.
Mhm.
So that's part one. Let's see. So this is not our only time meeting Heather Biblow. We will, or seeing her, I should say, since we've met her now. In the episode, the Heather Biblow story later this season, Heather briefly takes Fran's place in the Sheffield household when Fran replaces her on a soap opera.
Oh.
So something to look forward to. This is not the last time that Fran is going to try to quit her job out of frustration over Maxwell not being willing to commit to their relationship. In the episode Call Me Fran, she quits because, well, she it's sort of a bit of a convoluted story, but she gets her through Maxwell, she gets tickets to a basketball game for her dad's birthday, but her dad doesn't come. Sylvia says, oh, he's not feeling well. He ate a box of sausages. But then it turns out that he did eat the box of sausages, but they didn't upset his stomach at all. But that Morty didn't want to come because he knows the tickets came from Maxwell, and he doesn't like to see Fran wasting her young life on a man who's never going to marry her.
Wow.
And so Fran, yeah, exactly. So Fran, by that point, is in therapy. And so she's discussing this with her therapist. And she sort of comes to the conclusion that her father is never going to change. Maxwell's never going to change, because Maxwell's just like her father. He keeps her at arm's length. And in discussing this with her mother, she's explaining that everything's Daddy's fault. And so Sylvia's thrilled it's not her. But Fran realizes, I have to change myself. And so she goes to the Sheffield home, and Sylvia follows her in her slippered feet, shouting, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? How could you make this decision? And Fran says to Maxwell that, she's waited around long enough. She has to move on. And, because she realizes that Maxwell's never going to change, and just like her father won't change. And just as she's about to walk out the door, he calls her by her given name, and she stops in her tracks. And from there, he starts calling her Fran when they're alone, not in front of the kids or Niles or Cece. But
wow, progress.
It's enough progress to keep her there. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing I will mention is, in the department store, Fran says to Maxwell that no one knows what we have with each other except for Ma and Val. And I'm sure the kids have some inkling. One of the kids has an inkling, and that's Maggie. And that comes up in the episode The Nanny and the Hunk Producer later this season, where Maxwell's play does really well, and a tabloid picks up the story of Maxwell and Fran and makes all these wild allegations that they've been, involved with each other for years, and that Maxwell cheated on his wife on their honeymoon with Fran. And how do they find out about this tabloid story? Maggie's classmates give her the tabloid. And Maggie believes the tabloid over Fran. And Fran tries to explain to her, oh, well, you see, I'm wearing whatever type of makeup. That didn't come out until, X year, which was so many years later. There's your smoking gun. And Maggie's just like, basically doesn't believe her. And Fran's like, I can't believe you think I'm capable of something like this. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. And Maggie says, well, I've tried, something along the lines of, I've tried, like, this is the only thing that makes sense. It's, it's clear that Daddy's in love with you. That's why you're still here, even though like two of us can drive. And Fran immediately turns around and is like, all is forgiven. So yeah, we've got a lot of fun in our future.
Indeed. Okay. So now we can move on to episode ratings.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. As a reminder to our lovely listeners, we rank each episode from 1 to 5 lipsticks, with 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. But our ratings are kind of arbitrary. We can always choose to change them at a later date. This week, Debbie, you get to go first.
I knew it. Overall, I like this episode. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny possible step forward. As you pointed out, it seems sort of unrealistic that he actually changed his will to include that statement. But I do like that Niles knows. I do like that the kids want Fran back, and they basically twist Maxwell's arm to go get her.
But quickly, just jumping off of that,
sure.
I actually don't think they have to twist his arm to it. I think he secretly did want to go. He didn't want Niles to think that Niles could tell him to go, but he caved in so quickly when the kids came in.
I think you're right, but he also wanted cover. He wasn't going to go on his own.
Yeah.
And like, it would have been better had he been willing and able to go on his own and told her what we all wanted him to say and we all wanted to hear, which is, I miss you. I need you. Please come home.
I love you.
Well, I mean, please, he's not ready to shout that from the rooftops yet, as he just told her. Yes, of course, we want to hear him say that. We want him to not take it back. It's a fine episode. I think I liked last week better, so I'm gonna give it a 3.75. How about you?
Okay. Surprisingly,
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Surprisingly, I'm gonna draw out the tension. What did I give last week's episode?
4.5.
Okay. I'm gonna do that again.
Wow.
I know. It's a change of pace here.
Yeah.
You sound so amazed.
I'm looking at our rankings for this season, and there are a number of places where you ranked an episode higher than I did.
Yeah.
I mean, they're also the opposite as well, but
yes. But just in these past 2 weeks. And I do that just because, again, while I don't think it's realistic, I think he's placating her. Again, to some extent, like we don't really explore Danny passing away much, aside from like the wake or anything like that. It's still, like I said, there's some progress, I guess, in the relationship, and then primarily it's it's Niles finally learning what happened.
right.
Yeah, maybe I'm just in a really good mood today, but
also possible.
I'll just give it a 4.5 for now. We'll see at the end of the season how I feel.
Exactly, because we can change our ratings. We reserve that right.
Indeed.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
I do not.
All right, then. That's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next week when we'll be discussing episode 88, Kissing Cousins.
If you would like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us email at afinetimenannyrevisited@gmail.com. Have a great week.